POV. You were born with everything, but you still feel empty inside. You were born into the kind of life people envy without thinking twice. Big house, good schools, nice clothes, vacations people post about for months, parents with money, connections, security, a future already built before you were old enough to understand what that even meant. From the outside, your life looked unbeatable. And that's what made it so hard to explain the one thing nobody could see. You felt empty, not broke, not abandoned, not desperate, just empty. And the worst part, you had no proof anyone would take that seriously. Because how do you explain emptiness when your life looks like a reward? How do you say, I don't feel right when everyone around you is acting like you already won? People see money and assume peace. They see comfort and assume happiness. They see privilege and assume your mind must be quiet. But that's not how it works. Because sometimes the loneliest feeling in the world is standing inside a perfect life and realizing it still doesn't reach you. As a kid, you didn't notice it right away. At first, life was exciting. New toys, big birthdays, family trips, expensive gifts for no reason. The kind of childhood other kids would have traded theirs for instantly. Every time something new arrived, it gave you that little hit, that spark, that quick feeling of, yeah, this is good. This is what happy must be. But the feeling never stayed. Not for long. A new gift became an old object. A special day became another memory. A dream purchase became background furniture in your room. And even as a kid, you started noticing something strange. The things that were supposed to fill you only distracted you. That's the first thing nobody tells you about getting everything too early. It can ruin your ability to tell the difference between excitement and meaning. Because if every want gets answered fast enough, you stop developing hunger. And if you stop developing hunger, you can end up growing into a person who has access to everything, but feels deeply connected to nothing. So you kept chasing that first feeling, the next gift, the next experience, the next upgrade, the next thing that might finally make your chest feel full, but it never did. It just bought you a few more hours of not noticing the emptiness. Your parents gave you everything they thought mattered: safety, opportunity, protection, a polished future. And maybe they really did love you, but love can become confusing when it always arrives through management, through planning, through expectations, through carefully arranged success. You didn't just grow up supported, you grew up shaped. What school made sense, what hobbies looked good, what friends were acceptable, what behavior reflected well on the family, what future sounded impressive when relatives asked questions at dinner. Nobody said, become fake. But little by little, you learned something close to it. You learned how to become acceptable. And acceptable is dangerous, because when people reward you for being polished, you start confusing approval with identity. You say the right things, pick the right goals, smile at the right moments, wear the right version of yourself in every room. And everybody loves you for it. Teachers call you promising, adults call you mature, friends call you lucky, family calls you blessed. Meanwhile, inside, you're slowly becoming a stranger to yourself. Because the more your life gets built around what looks right, the harder it becomes to hear what actually feels right. That's when the emptiness changes. At first, it just feels like boredom. Then it feels like restlessness. Then it turns into this weird private numbness you can't explain. You still laugh, still go out, still post, still perform, still show up to things, still look like someone enjoying their life. But when it's quiet, when the party ends, when the trip is over, when the lights are off and you're alone in your room, there it is again. That feeling. Like you're somehow missing your own life while living it. And the really brutal part, you start feeling guilty for feeling bad because you know how ridiculous it sounds. There are people dealing with real pain, real instability, real fear, real survival, and here you are in a comfortable house, in clean clothes, with options most people never get, feeling nothing. So you don't speak. You don't want to sound spoiled. You don't want to sound weak. You don't want people looking at you like your sadness is a luxury item. So you do what high functioning, empty people do best. You get better at pretending. You become really good at looking okay. Better than okay, actually. You become impressive, busy, disciplined, capable, social, put together. Because if your inner life feels hollow, the easiest thing to do is overbuild the outside. Make the grades look good. Make the body look good. Make the photos look good. Make the future look good. Make sure nobody has a reason to ask questions. And after a while, the performance gets so strong that even you almost believe it. Almost. But performance never fixes emptiness. It just gives it better lighting. Teenage years should have felt electric. That's what everyone says. These are supposed to be the years where everything hits hard. Crushes, friendships, embarrassment, freedom, chaos, desire, dreams. And sure, you had moments. The parties, the late night drives, the expensive mistakes, the stories, the people, the attention. But even in the middle of all that noise, something was off. You could be surrounded by people and still feel unreachable. Not alone in the obvious way, alone in the deeper way. Like nobody was actually meeting you. They were meeting your lifestyle, your energy, your image, your access, your last name, your usefulness, your shine. And it made you wonder something you couldn't unthink. If all the shiny parts disappeared, who would still stay long enough to know you? That question follows you everywhere. In friendships, in dating, in family conversations, in every room where people seem excited to be near you. Do they like me? Or do they like being close to what my life represents? Do they know me? Or have they just learned my surface? Would I still matter if I had less? Less money, less image, less polish, less certainty, less value to offer. And once that question gets inside you, it changes things. Because now even affection starts feeling unstable. Now praise feels suspicious, attention feels cheap, validation feels temporary, and the emptiness gets bigger because trust gets weaker. So, like a lot of people in your position, you start chasing intensity. Because when life doesn't feel meaningful, intensity feels like the next best thing. More spending, more parties, more attention, more chaos, more people, more flirting, more danger, more stimulation. You tell yourself you're just enjoying life. And maybe part of you is. But another part of you is trying to outrun silence. Because silence is where the truth lives. And the truth is simple. Nothing outside you is sticking. No matter how expensive, no matter how beautiful, no matter how exclusive, no matter how desired by other people. It all fades the same way. Fast. Then comes the weirdest part of all. You start envying people whose lives look less comfortable than yours. Not because you want their struggle, not because pain is romantic, not because being broke builds character in some magical way, but because some of them seem real in a way you don't. Their joy lands harder. Their love looks less curated. Their goals seem chosen, not inherited. Their identity looks earned. They don't seem trapped inside a version of life that was prepared for them. They seem present, and that messes with you. Because now you're forced to consider something brutal. Maybe your life gave you comfort, but robbed you of contact. Contact with need. Contact with risk. Contact with desire. Contact with the part of life that forces a person to discover who they really are. College, freedom, adulthood. You think one of these will fix it. A new city, new people, new space, no parents watching, no family image to protect every second. Now you'll finally become yourself. But freedom exposes people too, because once the structure is gone, you finally have to face what's underneath all the polish. And underneath yours, confusion. You know how to impress, you know how to adapt, You know how to survive socially. You know how to sound ambitious. But when someone asks you a direct question like, what do you actually want? You freeze. Not because you're dumb, not because you're lazy, because you realize most of your life has been about becoming admirable, not becoming honest. That moment hits harder than people think. Because if you don't know what you want, then what exactly have you been building? Whose life is this? Who picked this path? Who picked these goals? Who picked this image? Who decided success had to look like this? Who taught you that being envied was better than being connected? And if the answer to most of those questions is other people, or that's just what made sense, or it was expected, then the emptiness suddenly makes perfect sense. You're not empty because nothing is enough. You're empty because too much of your life was never truly yours. That realization hurts a lot because now you're grieving something invisible, not a death, not a breakup, not a disaster. You're grieving the possibility that you've spent years becoming a version of yourself that functions beautifully, but doesn't feel alive. That kind of grief is hard to explain. Nobody brings you flowers for it. Nobody checks in. Nobody says, I'm sorry, you've been slowly disappearing inside a successful life. They just keep complimenting the outside, and somehow that makes it worse. Because the better your life looks, the lonelier it feels to admit it doesn't feel like yours. So now the emptiness stops feeling random. Now it feels like a message, a harsh one, but an honest one. It says, you can't buy identity. You can't inherit purpose. You can't schedule fulfillment. You can't impress your way into inner peace. You can't keep feeding yourself stimulation and expect it to turn into meaning. And most of all, you can't build a whole life around appearance and then act surprised when it only works on the surface. That truth is brutal, but it also changes everything. Because once emptiness becomes information instead of shame, you can finally do something with it. So maybe for the first time, you stop trying to look full and you start trying to be real. Not dramatic, not reckless, not self destructive, just real. You slow down. You sit in silence longer. You stop using distraction every time discomfort appears. You stop saying yes automatically. You stop choosing what sounds impressive over what feels true. And at first, it feels terrible. Because when you remove constant stimulation, you finally hear how tired your inner life has been, how lonely, how disconnected, how underfed. But at least now it's honest, and honest pain is better than polished numbness. You begin making smaller changes than people expect. You say no more, you disappoint people more. You choose things that don't photograph as well. You stop needing every move to make sense to the audience around you. And slowly, something starts happening. Not happiness, not yet. Something more important. You start feeling present in conversations that aren't performative, in work that actually costs effort, in relationships where you don't have to play a role, in quiet mornings, in unglamorous choices, in moments nobody would envy, but you would never trade. That's when you realize something huge. Meaning doesn't always feel exciting. A lot of the time, it feels grounded. And if you spent your whole life chasing stimulation, grounded can feel unfamiliar at first. But unfamiliar doesn't mean wrong. Sometimes it means real. That's the twist. You weren't empty because you were broken. You were empty because your life kept handing you substitutes. Expensive substitutes. Beautiful substitutes. Socially admired substitutes. But still substitutes. Substitutes for connection, for ownership, for truth, for intimacy, for earned purpose, for the messy process of actually becoming someone. And deep down, your mind knew the difference the whole time. That's why the gifts faded. That's why the attention faded. That's why the milestones faded. That's why even winning started to feel flat. Because your soul was rejecting what your image kept accepting. And maybe that's why this kind of emptiness scares people so much. Because it proves something most people don't want to hear. A person can have everything people dream about and still feel starved. Not materially, existentially, emotionally, spiritually. You can be comfortable and disconnected, admired and unseen, protected and lost, surrounded and alone, successful and absent from your own life. That's why the outside can fool everyone, including you, until one day it can't anymore. So, yes, you were born with everything: the head start, the comfort, the access, the polished future, the kind of life that makes strangers think your story must already be finished. But the real story didn't begin with what you were given. It began the moment you noticed none of it could answer the question underneath everything: what actually fills a person, not distracts them, not flatters them, not makes them look successful, not makes other people jealous. What actually fills them? And once that question becomes real, your whole life changes. Because now the goal is no longer to be admired. Now the goal is to feel alive. And that changes the way you measure everything. Not, does this look impressive? But, does this feel true? Not, will people respect this? But, can I actually feel myself in this? Not, is this the smart move? But, is this my move? That kind of life is messier. It disappoints more people. It looks less polished. It doesn't always win the room, but it gives you something your old life never could: a sense that you're actually inside your own choices. And once you feel that, even a little bit, you stop worshiping the fake version of fullness, because now you know the difference. So the emptiness wasn't the end of your story. It was the first honest thing in it. The first signal that comfort wasn't enough. The first proof that performance had limits. The first crack in the polished version of your life. The first voice inside you that refused to be bribed by appearance. And maybe that voice saved you, because if it never hurt, you might have stayed in the beautiful lie forever. You might have kept collecting upgrades, praise, attention, and approval, while quietly disappearing underneath all of it. So, no, the saddest story isn't being born with nothing. Sometimes the saddest story is being born with everything people can see. But growing up without the one thing you actually needed: a real relationship with yourself. And the healing begins the moment you stop asking, why am I not grateful enough for this life? And start asking, what would make this life finally feel like mine? Because having everything except that still feels like having nothing at all.